Let's get started. And today we're talking about the 7 essential elements of school transformation. And so really what we're talking through is technology plans and how technology can be a bit of a lever to bring about that school transformation. Again, just a reminder, use the chat, ask your questions, leave your comments, and then you can also click request to participate if you want, now that we're all in and we've got the start under our belt. So more than happy to bring you into the call, and you can turn your camera on or your microphone on and we can have a chat. Marg, I'm just going to remove you. If you did want to chat, then just request again and I'll let you in, just in case that wasn't meant to be there. At least I can see that you want to come in. So, okay, let's jump into this. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and to be honest, I could talk leadership stuff all day, and so 50 minutes is going to be a challenge. We do have a full day version that we do this with school leadership teams, so if you're interested in that at the end of this session, let me know. But one of the things when we're talking about school transformation that we need to sort out in our minds first is that there is a difference between change management and transformation. So quite often schools get caught in a change management mindset. And if you came to the last session where we talked about culture and creating a culture of innovation in our school, sometimes we miss the opportunity to really transform because we get too bogged down in the details. And schools are great at details. We're very good at policy. We're very good at documentation. And so sometimes that is a little bit of an inhibitor for us to really be able to change and see the transformation we want. So we want to define this first, because there is a place for change management, and change management is great, but we don't want to miss the opportunity to be transformative. So the definition of change management is executing a single well-defined initiative. So I'll flesh this out a little bit for you in a minute. Transformation is a portfolio of initiatives, and so change management is one change that we're trying to drive. Transformation is having a portfolio of things that we're working on. Now, those things that we're working on are quite often interwoven, and they're interlocked and they're interdependent on each other. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to work out a new model of how things may work. So when we're looking at this whole concept of change is a really interesting topic, hey, whether it's change management or just change in general, because often what we say is that my people don't like change. And to be honest, that's not true. And let me explain it to you this way. If your staff didn't like change, if you said to them, you know what, we've just gone to level 1, we're allowed to travel again, we're all going to jump on a plane, we're going to fly down to Queenstown, we're going to stay at the best hotel we can find because they're also cheap at the moment, and we're going to do some school PD for 2 days in Queenstown. But, you know, I don't think we'll do it because no one likes change. We better just come to school on the weekend and we'll just meet in the staff room. I mean, for me, I'd be hands up. That's me. I'm going to Queenstown. Let's change it up, right? So it's not that people don't like change. It's that people don't like how change is done to them. And so there's a whole element of change that we could dig into and how to do change well and how to change perspectives. But change really is about looking at things differently. It's about seeing different things. And one of the examples that Google give around change is when one of the engineers was talking about how he had a brand new baby, and he bought his baby a mobile, like something like this one, and he thought it would be amazing, right? Because it's colorful, it's got shapes and imagery, and it moves. And so he laid his baby down underneath the mobile, and the baby paid virtually no attention to the mobile whatsoever. And so he's looking at the mobile and he's looking at the colors and the shapes and the movement, and he's like, surely this should be capturing the baby's attention, and it's just not. And he started to wonder, what's going on? Like, why is my baby not paying attention to this? Is there a problem? And so on. But what happened was that he decided to lie down next to his baby and look at the mobile from the baby's perspective, and this is what the baby was seeing, right? So not very engaging whatsoever. So from his perspective, he was seeing this. From the baby's perspective, they were seeing this. And so quite often when we're talking about school transformation and we're talking about change, as a leader, often we're seeing this in our mind, and our parents are seeing this, or our teachers are seeing this, or the students are seeing this, or the community members are seeing this. So really, when we're talking about change, one of the things we need to think through is a real perspective thing around how do I get to have the same perspective as the people we're doing change with, and then how do we change what they see so that they can see what I see. So when we're talking about transformation and change management in a school, if we're looking at change management, and maybe we're looking at the SAMA model as an example of that, what we see is that quite often we talk about substitution and augmentation, and we're trying to move teachers from that substitution place where they're using a Google Doc rather than a piece of paper. We're still just pushing a piece of paper, nothing's changed, and maybe they're augmenting a little bit. That might be a change management piece, right? So how do I get them to go from substitution to augmentation? How do I make that happen? Transformation is really around that modification redefinition framework, right? So how do I take a portfolio of initiatives and not just substitute, not just augment, but how do I modify or completely redefine how we're doing things? And so quite an interesting model to look at. Now, when we're doing change with teachers, or change in any business, to be honest, we need to manage that whole change fatigue, and we need to manage that change process really well. And that's where change management does play a really important role. It was interesting that Google did a survey with American teachers, and you'd find it to be the same universally, I would imagine. But 71% of the teachers that they surveyed found that workplace stress to the adoption of new initiatives was the reason that they were so stressed. So the adoption of new initiatives. It was really interesting to me when I was learning about change from Google and learning about change from Microsoft and some of these big companies. Companies went from you go to work and you sit at your seat in your booth to you go to open plan, kind of like an open plan learning in a sense. So you just walk in, your hot desk in, you sit wherever you want. And so these organizations that I was studying, and Xero was a perfect example of this, Xero accounting software. If you've ever had the opportunity to visit their offices, they're fantastic. They had a budget for making the office look amazing. If you've ever been to a Google office, it looks fantastic. But so they had a budget for the fit out and the look and feel. And then they had a budget for the professional development and the training. How do you work differently? How do you work more remotely, and how does that look? And so when I was learning from these organizations, generally speaking, the change budget was as big as, if not bigger, than the fit out budget. And so it's something that I think industry is starting to catch on to, that we need to spend a lot of time doing change management and bringing people on the journey with us in here. So pretty keen to have a look at this with you so that you can lead that change and transformation process in a sustainable way, in a way that makes a difference, but in a way that's not going to burn teachers out and burn our staff out. So here's an example of professional development. So a change management approach to professional development would be, okay, we want all of our teachers using G Suite, and we're just buying Chromebooks for our kids. Maybe you've gone one-to-one Chromebooks in years 5 to 8 or something. And so you look at this as you say, okay, how do we get our teachers so they feel supported and comfortable using G Suite in the classroom? That's a change management perspective. If we looked at transformation as an example, then one of the things we would start to ask is like, okay, so we need to provide PD to our staff so they can use G Suite. Great. What would it look like to take a step further back from that? And what if we completely redefined how PD happened so that we created a professional development pathway that really gives teachers agency? And if you sat through my last session, this is one of the questions we asked, is how do we give our teachers more agency over their own classroom, over their own learning journey, and so on. So you see how one would be very prescriptive. How do we get our teachers more comfortable with G Suite? The other one would take a step back and go, okay, we've got an opportunity now that we've got technology to be able to provide professional development in a way that we would never have been able to provide if we didn't have tech. So now that we've got the technology, what does that enable us to do for our PD that would revolutionize the way that PD happens in our school? And obviously, being a professional development partner for Google, we've got a lot of ideas around that. And if we had more time, and again, in our day sessions, this is the sort of things we start to unpack. Learning example. So a change management of a learning example would be, how do we ensure that our students are proficient in using Chromebooks or proficient in using G Suite in classroom? So that's very prescriptive. We go down the path of providing professional development and training and student boot camps, and there's a whole range of ways that we can approach that. Or we could step back and say, okay, so now we've got more devices, whether it's 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-3. What would it look like to implement a new model of teaching and learning? Now, if you combine this with the building a culture of innovation session that I just ran, and if you didn't sit in that one, don't worry, you can grab the recording. One of the things we talk about is how do we give more agency around what learning could look like in the classroom. And so maybe we give our teachers the opportunity to look at blended learning, personalized learning, competency-based progressions. Maybe now that we've got technology, we could have students crisscrossing the school to go to different coaches to learn from different teachers who are strong in different areas. So what could we do to transform that? And again, you don't have to go and change everything. You maybe just want to try with one class or 4 students in a class and just try to test a model and see how that looks. So when we're talking about transformation takes more than technology, but technology definitely can be the leader, the lever that enables that transformation to take place. And I think if you're a school leader, you probably saw this play out when the ministry introduced the new digital technologies curriculum, because what we saw a lot of leaders doing, and this is what I would have done, is blame the ministry. So you've got teachers who don't necessarily want to change for whatever reason that might be, but you're able to say, listen, it's not on me. The government's requiring us to teach this, and we need to have a little bit more technology in the class, and it needs to be authentic and meaningful. We want it to be cross-curricular, so let's dig in and learn about this. And so technology becomes a bit of a lever that we can use to bring about that change that we're looking to see in our school. So one of the questions we often ask, especially in New Zealand around BYOD, is how do we get our BYOD to mean bring your own device, not bring your own disaster? And so when we're looking at this element of how do we run a technology plan that actually works, this is where we start looking at the 7 elements and how each of those elements come in. So there's 2 parts of this. Transformation, we want to be transformative, but then we want a framework or a model that we can build our transformation around. And in New Zealand, because in New Zealand, a lot of people do BYOD, we do see a lot of disaster around there in the way that that is actually played out. And it's generally speaking, if you come back to the concept of transformation versus change management, the reason that it happens is that we need to address all 7 elements. And sometimes what we've done is we've zeroed in on one of the 7 elements or 2 of the 7, even 4 of the 7, but we've missed a couple of elements. And so our technology plan hasn't reached the potential that we hoped it would have had. So basically there's 7 elements. And so if you want your technology plan to work, I kind of see it like a wine barrel. So in here in the wine barrel, we've got all the staves and they're all at the same sort of height. If I fill that wine barrel, it's all going to overflow at the lowest point. Right? So if I look at this from a point of view of the 7 elements, if each one of these staves was an element, and I'm really strong in PD, and I've got amazing infrastructure, and the parents are all on board, and they're just loving the program, but I'm missing a piece in here, what will happen is even though you're really strong on these ones here, because you're missing this piece here, all of the energy flows out at the lowest common denominator. So you really do need to look at all 7 elements, and you need to have a plan to be progressing all 7. That doesn't mean you're necessarily focused all on 7 all at the same time, but that does mean that you are focused and you do have your attention on what's happening. So when we're looking at technology plans, quite often as a school, what we'll do is we'll go to a conference and we'll see a program, or we'll go visit another school and we'll see what they're doing. And quite often we ask the question, like, what's working? And I like it. Dylan Williams is a researcher, and I like the way he puts this, that he says what works is rarely the right question to ask, because everything's going to work somewhere and nothing's going to work everywhere. So what you need to do is you need to ask the right question. And so when you're looking at technology plans and technology programs and frameworks and things like that, the question that you want to ask is, under what conditions is this working, right? So what you want to do is you want to just think, okay, so under what conditions is this working? Every great technology plan that we've seen executed in a school has come from a customized, contextualized program where the school has looked at their particular context, they've looked at their particular culture, they've looked at the pain points, and they've got about setting up a program of works that actually answers that. And so quite often you'll see these schools that become a little bit famous because of their program, and you try and implement that program and it fails. And it's not that the program is wrong, it's just that it hasn't addressed your local needs. And again, this is perfect because the ministry are now focusing from term 4 next year, basically term 4 this year, really kicking off term 1 next year on local curriculum. This gives us the perfect opportunity as schools to really dig into this and create some really meaningful experiences. So here are the 7 elements that we need to go through, and I'm going to give you like a program which lays out each of these 7 elements step by step, what you need to think about at each level, the conversations you need to have. It really is paint by numbers if you want. But again, it's not a program that you can just take and plug and play. It asks you questions that you need to answer as you're going. So with the 7 elements, we've got vision, we've got team and culture, we've got infrastructure and technology, we've got funding and sustainability, we've got professional development, we've got our learning approach, and we've got community engagement. Now, this isn't in an order of hierarchy in a sense, like this one, do this one first, this one the second, this one third, and so on. What we do have is looking at each of these. I think some of them need to be weighted more heavily than others, but at the same time, it's not like do this one in the expense of all others, if that kind of makes sense. So in terms of how this would look, where you really want to start is with your vision and then followed by team and culture. And the reason we say that is because if you don't have a clear vision, then people aren't really going to know where to go. Like they can't see what you're seeing. So remember the picture that I showed you of the mobile and what the engineer thought someone was seeing? Well, they were seeing something different. And that's where we're trying to get to with that. It's how do I get my team to see what I see? How do I get the community to see what I see? And so on. So if I start to break down each of these elements, the vision is how do I make that vision clear and concise? Now, one of the things we need to think about is that we speak in pictures, not words. So if I say the word elephant, you don't see an elephant in terms of the letters floating across the atmosphere. You see an elephant. And so I could cast vision to you. I need to speak in words. But the clearer I can make this and the more concise I can make it, the more you're going to see what I'm seeing. It's going to be that mobile analogy. So if I say elephant, you see an elephant, but you're not seeing the elephant that I see. So right now, the elephant that I see is small enough to fit on top of this mobile phone. And now you're like, oh, my picture of my elephant now just changed to match the picture of your elephant. But that's not my elephant, because my elephant's got one pink ear and one red ear. And then you're like, oh, okay, so now I'm starting to see your elephant. And then one leg's longer than the other leg, and the tail is so long that it goes all the way through and you know, drops to the floor and is like 5 times longer than the elephant's body is. And so the more definition I give you, the more information I give you, the more you start to see what I see. And so vision by definition is sight, right? It's visual. And so when you're looking at your school vision, the last thing you want is a verbose statement that sits in a folder somewhere. What you want to do is you want to cast vision so clear that your staff, that your students, that your parents, they see what you see. And there's no misinterpretation of it. They're not seeing one elephant while you're seeing another. And so you need to take the time to clearly articulate what your vision is for your technology plan, for teaching and learning, and so on, and then have it so that everyone understands it. Now, one of the surveys we have, and I'll give you this as a survey tool at the end of this, is that we survey schools if they do a program of works with us, where we ask your leadership team and then we ask your teaching team a series of questions around each of these 7 elements. And one of the questions we ask is, in one sentence or less, tell me what the school vision is. And we are yet to find a school where 100% of the leadership team, let alone 100% of the school team, are all saying the same thing. So you want to have common language. You want to be saying the same thing. You want to be seeing the same thing. So having that clear and concise vision is super important. So this comes to that. Let me just quickly check over to chat and make sure there's no questions from you or comments that I need to be aware of. Nope, we're okay. Feel free to throw them in if you like. Let's move on to element 2. Element 2 is culture. Now, we just did a whole session on culture. The definition of culture is that's just what we do around here. And so when you're in a culture, you don't know you're in it. You're just in that culture. So you know that you have a culture when everyone speaks the same and they act the same. So if you don't have a strong vision, it's very hard to have a strong culture, because for you to do culture well, it needs to be on autopilot. It needs to be routine. It needs to be done without thinking, without being prompted, and so on. So one of the things you want to do in terms of your technology use is that's just what we do around here. So when you come to class, we get out our computer, we use Google, whatever that is in terms of your vision. And as a school leader, you should be able to walk around the school and go, that's it, that's not it, and defining what it is via your vision. So that what that does is it starts to eliminate the need for you to have in your school, this cohort of teachers are doing this cohort of teachers, we call them the laggards, and they're they don't want to get on board with anything, and we just kind of let them sit in the corner and do their things. What you can have is a culture where everyone is engaged, everyone's working together, everyone's working towards the vision of the school. Now, that's not to say that you don't have your early adopters and your big middle and then those that are a little bit late in their adoption. Of course, we're always going to have that. But what we do is we have a culture that acts on it. Now, it's really interesting. When I do leadership lessons in sessions in schools, I can tell what your culture is really quickly just by walking around the school, by observing how do teachers come into a staff meeting. That tells me a lot about the school culture. If everyone wanders in 15 minutes late, 10 minutes late, they're all disruptive, no one's really listening, I can tell things about your culture, because they're not doing it on purpose. They're just doing it out of culture. It's just what we do. So you need to make sure that you have everyone on the same page with that, and you're just really focused in on that. So the next element around culture is learning design. And again, these aren't necessarily in order. We're just putting them up. But you've got so many different options. You've got the 4 C's, and some schools are down into the 6 C's now. You've got SAMR models. You've got TPAC models. You've got new pedagogies for deep learning. You've got project-based learning. You've got student agency. We've got innovative learning environments. We've got, all sorts of things, blended learning. It's all happening, right? So we've got so many different ways that we can teach and students can learn, and we've got so many different ideas around that. One of the things that you need to understand, and the question you need to answer, is part of our vision is, at this school, this is how our teachers teach, and this is how our students learn. Now, it doesn't have to be a prescriptive, we all teach from the same song sheet, we're going to be scripted, but there's an understanding of, at this school, this is how we teach, and this is how our students learn. And we see this all the time. You'll have parents who bring their kids to your school, and initially they'll think your school's wonderful. And then the first sign of things not going so well, maybe they feel like their child's a little bit disengaged. All of a sudden, the other school that they just came from was wonderful in the way they did it. And, oh, our previous teacher did this. And the school used to do this. And they want to tell you about how awesome things were, right? One of the answers that you've got to that is, well, at our school, this is how our teachers teach, and this is how our students learn. This is our philosophy of learning. And then when we come to the community part, I'll explain how we engage that. But there's no point choosing a learning design that does not match your technology design. So we want to have a particular learning model, and then you choose technology that's going to inhibit that kind of learning. So you need to think this through before you race down the path of which device are we buying, what specs do we need, all of that sort of stuff. Element 4 is professional development. So one of the things that we talk about professional development is that sometimes you get cornered into a change management program where we're trying to do a professional development program or a change management program or learning plans. And what that generally conjures up in my mind is that here's the folder I'm going to pull off, or here's the slide deck that I'm about to show you. And we're just going to work you through the program, regardless if you're an early adopter, a late adopter, in the middle. Everybody comes in, we all do the same training at the same time. We're all going to be professionally developed together. One of the spins that we like to put on this is that you shouldn't do professional development, you should do people development. So when you frame this just a little bit differently, we change it from developing professionally to developing our people. And there's a whole lot of nuances in that around treating the whole person, taking care of their emotional well-being, as well as their professional well-being, and so on. And so when you do professional development, you'll often bump into things like people may be resistant to the change, people having opinions that maybe don't line up, maybe aren't helpful. But if you understood the person behind that, in the last session around culture, we talked about the 5 whys, and you ask, why is this person resistant, and why, and then why, and then why, and you dig deeper and deeper into that. Maybe what you'll do is you'll find the reason behind the person. If you develop the person, then the profession part gets developed. So you end up having those professional discussions around that people development piece. Hopefully that makes sense. I'd like to have time to dig into that, but we'll need to just keep moving. So element 4 is professional development. And again, you might be thinking at your school and you're going, okay, maybe we need to work on our vision a little bit. I feel like we've got a good team, our culture's set, so we won't work on that. Maybe our professional development may need a little bit of tweaking. We may have our learning approach down set. We're good with that. So you're starting to think, okay, using that barrel analogy, what do I need to focus on next? And so on. Element 5 is community engagement. And the whole concept around community engagement is, how do I engage the community in education, not just give them information? So with this community engagement piece, it's multifaceted, and I'm going to try and simplify it just for time, but there is so much that you can do to engage community on the technology journey. Now, this is not how do we get our parents to support us by buying Chromebooks. This can be much deeper than that. So what we want to do is we want to take our teachers, our parents, our wider community groups on a bit of a journey with us, and educate them, not just give them information. So if you're doing a parent night, the purpose of your parent night should be to educate them, not just inform them. So again, there's nuances in this, but one of the things that we see is that sometimes you'll bring them in and you'll tell them all about your BYOD program and how it's benefiting teachers and how it's benefiting students and the learning outcomes. And you'll talk to them about the specs and the model that they need to buy and things like that. Or you can take the approach and you can educate them. And you could say, okay, let's unpack what Google Drive is and show them, teachers sometimes, because we've been in this for a while and we work with our students with it, we kind of assume, we don't think what it's like to see this for the first time. What was it like when we first engaged with Google? And so quite often parents are sitting at home feeling like they're disempowered from the learning process because their child used to bring a book home and the parent would say, "What did you do today?" And the student says nothing, like they usually do. And the parent would look and flick through the book and they'd be able to see the work they'd been doing and the comments the teacher had made and how much red pen is on the page, and they'd start to form a bit of an understanding of where things were from. And you heard about it even from Swan in the keynote. He said, having his children work at home, he's much more engaged in that learning process, right? So how do we empower our parents to understand Google Drive so that when an assignment comes home, the parent knows to say, okay, show me your most recent documents when the child says, oh, I haven't done anything at school? Or how do I do a proper Google search? And how do I know how my student is tracking, how my child's tracking in an assignment? So there's that element. There's the element of going out and casting vision to community groups who are interested in what's happening in the school. And so we've seen when schools really get on this and have a really great community engagement program, finances come in from different community groups. Specialist help gets offered, volunteered in, that would have saved you a fortune. You see all sorts of help starts to come because they get the vision and they see the learning that's happening and they think, man, I want to be a part of this. I want to be around this. And so they sow into what you're doing as a school organization. And so there's so many tactics around that. It's how do you run parent information and assemblies better so that parents can get the information without having to come at a night. How do we use Facebook better? How do we engage parents on social media? How do we do our newsletters better so our newsletters tell a story and we can actually know what parents are clicking on so we know what's resonating with community and what's not getting any clicks, and how do we track engagement? And so there's a whole lot of work that could be done around this community engagement piece. All right, I'm just looking at, I'm doing a lot of talking. Is there any questions? No, not yet. Okay, just a reminder, chuck them in there. Okay, element 6, infrastructure and technology. I'll put this at the end for a reason. Again, it's not because one is necessarily more important. We need to have a holistic view. But unless you know your learning design, unless you've got a clear vision, unless you know who's on your team and the culture and what you're going to have to face in terms of transformation, you probably don't want to be thinking about technology and infrastructure, because otherwise you end up with a solution that now everything has to bend to, it has to bow down to it. So we would love to teach this way, but the technology doesn't enable it. We would love to be able to do this type of learning with our students, but the infrastructure isn't stable. So once you've set the vision and the culture and the values and so on, then you can start to look at your infrastructure and your technology. And this includes all sorts of things like how do we make sure that the teachers are confident that the technology is going to work. Having a look at your support tickets and seeing what type of support is being provided to teachers. Is it mostly basic low-level stuff, which would then suggest to me that we need to do more PD, because that would save you a fortune in IT costs? Or do we need to spend more time, everyone's telling me that the internet's too slow. Do we need to do that? Do our projectors not work? Like, where's the break points? Where's the points where the teachers aren't feeling confident with the technology that it's going to work? And then what can we do to solve that? And again, we've got a whole questionnaire that you can go through to elicit this information out of your teaching staff and also out of your leadership staff to try and figure that one out as to where do we need to go. But you do need to look at your technology and your infrastructure, and you need to have a framework to be able to work that through. How much tech support do you need based on the size of your school, for instance? There's all sorts of metrics and frameworks that you can be working through on that. The next one is funding and sustainability. So once you've determined the device, then you need to figure out what the budget is, and not the other way around. One of the things that we often see is we go, okay, I've got, let's say, $20,000 to spend on devices. So what we do is we end up going to the lowest common denominator and going, how can I get the most for the littlest spend? And so what we do is we undermine all of the great work that we're doing in terms of learning design and so on, and we're trying to go it's a race to the bottom, not to a race to the top. For me personally, I would much rather have half as much equipment that would get the job done and figure out how do I teach 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 than how do I teach 1 to 1 or 1 to 2. What would that look like? And if you're doing your community engagement piece, budget will come. You'll find areas, you'll see savings. One of the questions we ask in our survey, we ask all the teachers, is if you had to save $100,000 right now in the budget, what would you cut? And it's amazing to me when we look through these surveys from teachers, what they say, oh yeah, we pay 20 grand a year on this program and no one ever uses it. Or we're spending a ton of money on this license, but it's not really getting used. And so you start to do a bit of an audit of all the tools and the programs and the software and the licensing that you're using. And you start to see which ones would teachers drop in a heartbeat. So generally, when you start to have a strong vision and you know where you're going and you've got this is the device that best supports learning and best supports thinking, and this is the way we want to teach, then you can go back and you look at your budget and where you can increase it or decrease it or get creative around that happen. And at the same time, you want to be sustainably funding that, right? So it's not, how do I get a grant and buy 100 Chromebooks? Because what you're not thinking about is 3 years down the track when those Chromebooks need to be replaced, where am I going to get those $100,000 again from? So what's that sustainability piece look like? We've seen all sorts of schools do some really cool creative things around this, like putting up a chart and them wanting to reduce how much printing they do. So they set about setting a goal to not print because they're using Google Drive. And so the money that they saved on paper and toner, and then they could renegotiate their printer contract and the servicing and all of that, that money was then taken from that and then allocated into professional development and some teacher social emotional learning stuff. So they reallocated budget around because it came back to a clear vision and a clear why, and they had a reason and a purpose for doing it. So 7 elements. Let me just quickly flick back to the 7 so you can see them. So you've got your vision, you've got your team and your culture, you've got your infrastructure and your technology, you've got your funding and then the sustainability of that funding, you've got your professional or people development, you've got your learning approach, and you've got community engagement. Has anyone got any questions they want to ask or anything they want to dig into on that? Just going to quickly check the time and how we're going. Got about 5 minutes left. I'll give you a second just to type that in. While you're typing in your questions, let me just jump forward and I'm going to give you some resources on the back of this. So if you want to have a look at Google's Transformation Center, if you go to this URL, which is utb.fyi and then /transform, you don't need the whole HTTT part. Just go to utb.fyi and then /transform. That will take you through to the Google Transformation Center, and there's a whole lot of resources and options and things in there that you can have a look at and so on. It is quite overwhelming in terms of how much there is. There's case studies and there's all sorts of resources that you can work your way through. But that's one option for you. So utb.fyi /transform. But what I want to do is I want to just send you some information that will be able to give you some notes on this. I'll give you links to the slide deck. You'll get the recording to this session. There's some tools and there's survey tools and things like that. So if you want to go to utb.fyi and then /transformation resource, so transformation resource, that will take you through to a Google form. And in fact, let me just put that into chat for you. Transformation resource, chat. That there will take you through to a Google form and you can put your details into it and we'll send all of this out to you. I'll get that to you in the next couple of days. I'll also send out the survey to you, and you can answer the survey just so you can see what it's like. And then if you decide that you would like to do that with your school, from a leadership point of view, you'd like to run it through your school, and we often would do the survey every 6 to 12 months, so you can just see how the needle's moving and how things are progressing. You can do that. If you'd like to run through a leadership intensive with us, then just shoot me an email. It's just mike@usingtechnologybetter.com, and we can come out to your school and we can run this with your school or your koiako. More than happy to do that. And then we do have a program where we work with schools over a year, and we help you in each of these 7 elements, and we do some leadership stuff, and we do some professional learning for your teaching staff and so on. And it's a year-long program, so if you'd be interested in that, just shoot me an email with the subject, Are You Ready Schools or Leadership Intensive, or if you've got any questions, you can do that. So email Mike at using oops. See if I can spell properly. Yep, let me just put it in there. Do we work with departments? Yep, we sure do. And so, yeah, we either work, we want to work with the leadership level and then work down. But this is something that we also run in government organisations, businesses, and so on. So we can definitely help trickle that thinking down into different departments and help the departments think this way as well. We've talked a little bit about ministry funding. If you haven't received any ministry funding, then this is one of the services that we do use with the schools that have ministry funding, where we work with them to use their hours to build that the local version of this for themselves, where they look at their technology plan and how they roll it out. And then we provide the PD on the back of that as well. So that may be something that's of interest to you as well. I'm just going to give you a couple more minutes for questions or comments. In a minute, what we will do is we're going to head back to the main stage, and there's going to be some prize giveaways and so on. And then there are some expo booths that you can have a look at with there's some pretty cool offers. Some of our team will be there talking about Ministry of Education and some of our online on-demand courses that schools are grabbing in terms of their PD as well. Great to see such a great range of people here from all across the country, which is fantastic. So I do appreciate you taking time out of your evening. Hey, it's been great. Excellent. I'll give you about 1 more minute and then I'll close this session, and I'll head back over to the main stage and get that organised. But you've got my email there. If you need anything, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to help you out.